I'm Lindsay Musgrove. I'm a new graduate nurse, and I recently did a lot of research about couplet care and rooming in, and I've found that all of the leading pediatric and obstetric foundations support this practice. So there are a lot of benefits for both mother and baby. For the mother, you can start forming a routine with your baby. You learn to sleep in chunks as your baby naps. You have less anxiety about your baby being out of your sight, so you actually are able to sleep better and deeper than when you send your baby to the nursery. This is a great way to have successful breastfeeding. You're always there with your baby. You can learn your baby's cues and needs when they need to feed, when they need diapering, when they need rest.
Why did Lindsay Clancy, a 32-year-old mother of 3 young children, listen to an evil male voice that came to her audibly just a few weeks ago, January 24th, 2023, telling her to get rid of herself and her 3 young children during what she called a moment of psychosis? According to Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Sprague, Lindsay told her husband that the male voice told her it was her last chance. About 4,000 of you have voted thus far on whether Lindsay should be put in prison for life or if Lindsay should be committed to a mental facility. As of today, Friday, February 10th, viewers are pretty much split down the middle, about half and half. Half of the folks think Lindsay should go to prison for life for what she did to her children. The other half believe she belongs in a psychiatric hospital. We're about to talk about Lindsay's case, another case of a mom, Melanie Stokes out of Chicago, and the infamous case of Andrea Yates. 3 moms, 3 postpartum conditions, 3 very different outcomes. What will happen in 2023 as opposed to what happened in those cases in past years? In the end, I'll talk a little bit about my experiences. Thank God they're nothing like the depression or anything these moms face, but how I got over, as the old folks say, and why I've come to believe, after studying this case, moms with diagnosed postpartum conditions may deserve to be treated differently than some criminals who also commit familicide, but for different reasons, not due to postpartum psychosis or depression. First, let's look at how this labor and delivery nurse went from a young woman experiencing this blissful, beautiful Paradise Island, Atlantis, Bahamas wedding with her husband Patrick back on December 3rd, 2016, a gorgeous wedding, until just over 6 years later, that fateful day, January 24th, when her husband Patrick ran out for about 20 minutes to perform a couple of errands Lindsay sent him on and arrived home to a tragic situation. When Lindsay Musgrove married Patrick Clancy December 3rd, 2016, in Southington, Connecticut, they probably thought their lives would be idyllic as their wedding photos. Their formal wedding was held at the Church of St. Dominique in Connecticut, with a reception at Hawks Landing Country Club. The exquisite photos of this young couple likely spoke to them of a great future ahead. Like this photo obviously taken at the Atlantis in Paradise Island, Bahamas, a place where I've actually been. Crisp and clear, this couple had the world ahead of them. The story: it all started in the fine town of South Boston. Through his cousin and sister, Pat knew Lindsay was a special girl and only wanted to spend more time with her. Lindsay secretly had a big crush on Pat too. When Pat finally built up the courage, our first date was at 75 on Liberty on the 3rd of July. It was 95 degrees out, but we didn't care. We had so much fun, and we've had fun ever since. On December 31st, 2015, Pat took Lindsay back to where it all started, 75 on Liberty. We had a great dinner, went for a nice walk on that winter night, and then Pat got down on one knee to propose under the skyline in Boston's Seaport. We've enjoyed spending time together mostly between Boston, Connecticut, and Newport, Rhode Island. As beautiful as those areas are, we always look forward to seeing our friends and family more than anything. We can't wait to see them all together at our wedding, the couple wrote a little more than 6 years ago. video. Who would have thought? Cut to more than 6 years later, Lindsay Clancy would be laying partially paralyzed, arraigned in a hospital bed, accused of doing away with all of her and Patrick's 3 children. According to the CT Insider, everything changed on January 24th, 2023. That's when Patrick Clancy, Lindsay's husband, left the house real quickly to make a run to pick up medication and food. That's when Lindsay strangled all 3 of their children and jumped out of a window trying to end her own life. That same morning, January 24th, Lindsay took her daughter Cora to the pediatrician for an appointment. No issues in her demeanor or behavior were witnessed, and she went back home. Lindsay even went outside with Cora and Dawson to play in the snow and build a snowman, sending those photos to her mother and husband. Around 4 p.m. that same day, Lindsay searched on her phone for children's Miralax, that's a constipation medication, then looked for information about the 3V restaurant in Plymouth, Massachusetts. She viewed the directions from her home to the restaurant, quote, so she would know how long someone would be gone if they ran that errand. That's according to the ADA, Jennifer Sprague. Then Lindsay called CVS, asking specifically about the Miralax medication. The manager told her they were out, but they had similar medications. The manager at CVS also noted that Lindsay's voice didn't sound slurred or impaired in any way. It was nearly 5 p.m. when Lindsay texted her husband Patrick. He was working in his home office in the basement, and she asked Patrick if he wanted to get food from that Plymouth restaurant. This was an unusual request. When the family ordered takeout, they usually go somewhere close to their home. That's what Sprague, the ADA, noted. But it was a place that they had been in the past. By 5:15 p.m., Patrick left home to pick up the food and the medication. Surveillance footage showed Patrick at the CVS at 5:32 p.m. He went to the medication aisle and he called Lindsay at 5:33 p.m., but she didn't answer. Lindsay called him back a minute later, and during that really brief 14-second call, Patrick told Lindsay that he wasn't sure which medication to get, and she told him exactly which one to buy. He had no issues communicating with her. It was a completely normal call, although he did mention that Lindsay seemed like she was in the middle of something. Indeed, she was. Patrick left the store and could be seen on surveillance footage at the 3V restaurant at 5:54 p.m. He picked up the food and left within a minute. His world turned upside down. When he arrived home, the first thing he noticed was the silence. In a house full of children, it's usually not silent. He didn't hear their usual noise, the 3 young children. When Patrick went to look for his wife Lindsay at their home, Patrick called her at 6:09 p.m., but she didn't answer. Patrick went to their bedroom on the 2nd floor and noticed the door was locked. He opened it and found blood on the floor and an open window. Patrick ran downstairs into the backyard where he discovered his wife lying on the ground with cuts on her wrist and neck. Patrick called 911 and noted that the wounds were no longer bleeding. "What did you do?" Patrick asked his wife, who was still conscious, while on the phone with a dispatcher. Lindsay told him she tried to do away with herself and jumped out the window. Then he is heard on this no doubt horrific 911 call asking where the kids were. That's when Lindsay told him in the basement. Once the EMTs arrived to help his wife, Patrick, he was still on the phone with the dispatcher, ran to the basement calling out for his 3 children. In this unreleased 911 call, Patrick can be heard screaming in agony, in shock, as he found his children. Cora and Callan were on the basement floor, while Dawson was alone on the floor in his father's home office. Each child had the exercise band that was used to strangle them tied around their necks when their father found them. He removed the bands and begged his children to breathe. Patrick continued to scream scream uncontrollably. He yelled for the police officers to come down to the basement. Ambulances took the 3 children away to the hospital. Cora and Dawson were pronounced dead. Callan, meanwhile, was flown to Boston Children's Hospital, and doctors were able to restart his pulse, but he had no brain activity. The little baby was placed on life support for a few days before he also passed away. Lindsay, meanwhile, was taken to South Shore Hospital and later to the Boston area hospital, where she remained Tuesday. Lindsay has suffered several broken bones in her back and her rib cage. Reportedly, she is paralyzed from the waist down. What should happen to Lindsay Clancy? Initially, Lindsay was charged with only 2 counts of murder because her young baby held on for a little while before he sadly expired, along with all of her children, 3 counts of strangulation or suffocation, and 3 counts of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon because, unfortunately, as the details of Lindsay's case came out, we learned that she used some type of exercise bands as a ligature to strangle the children. She entered a not guilty plea. At this point, her probable cause hearing is scheduled for May 2nd, 2023. If Lindsay even makes it to that point, she's in a desperate state. One expert called her emotions flat. So Patrick and Lindsay's daughter, Cora, only 5 years old, beautiful girl, she died in the home along with her 3-year-old brother, Dawson. Only 8 months old, little baby Callan took a few days to die later. A funeral for all 3 children was held. Lindsay did express herself on Facebook, showing that motherhood was no bed of roses, even though she did post all these lovely photos showing that you can tell she had a love for her children. She also talked about her struggles. There was a July 2022 Facebook post where Lindsay wrote of postpartum anxiety, different problems, but not all of these Facebook posts are readily available. She also posted different things in different Facebook groups, and some of those posts, which we'll read a little bit of, also made people a little concerned after the fact about her resentment of at least one of her children, and it's of course not sitting well with some members of the general public. But the main gist of this is what we'll talk about is what happened and how polarizing it is and how some people are believing she did a horrible thing to these children, but I'm never in the burn in hell camp. Death penalty to Lindsay, because once you read the details, you will see why I have, of course, compassion for the children who lost their lives when they shouldn't have, so much compassion for her husband, who I cannot imagine this 911 call of Patrick on the phone with the dispatcher when he discovers his children's lifeless body and he begs them to breathe. I can have compassion for the children, for Patrick, but also have compassion for Lindsay, especially once you hear all of these cases and these moms who experience tragedy when something literally switched in their brain, a hormonal shift, a difference, and we're learning more and more about it over the years in the past 22 years since Andrea Yates, a famous mom who drowned her 5 children in 2001 in Texas. We've learned a lot in those years, and I think we still have a long way to go, but studying cases like these with a bit of empathy and mercy, even though I know people will say she didn't show her children any mercy, it's a hard row to hoe, but I can hold compassion for each one of them without posting stuff like Lindsay should just fry, who cares? It was only 6 weeks after the birth of little Callan that Lindsay started posting that she was feeling better, dialed in. She felt that exercise and her mindset was making all the difference. And you will see throughout this case, even though Lindsay had very clear moments of clarity, she was able to send her husband off for food and medication and everything. That still does not mean that she did not experience moments of postpartum psychosis, whether it was clearly diagnosed as that or not. In these cases, you will see some of these moms were able to have, of course, very lucid moments. Psychosis does not necessarily mean, I'm learning, that you're walking around acting crazy all the time and you don't know your head from your foot. It means these women still can plan excessively, exquisitely, and unfortunately still commit a psychotic crime. I don't know if the general public will agree. We'll see where this case goes because it can set a precedent. So Lindsay's defense attorney is Kevin Reddington, and he is painting a picture of a woman who is really struggling. Indeed, if you look at the long list of medications that Lindsay had been prescribed in recent months or years, you will feel compassion for her trying to get it right. Her doctors perhaps trying to find that combination that would work for her, that would click in her brain to prevent a moment of psychosis like this. Lindsay had been prescribed about a dozen medications over the years to try and control her condition. Unfortunately, none of them worked. I'm not sure if some of them exacerbated her problem. When you see the list, when you hear the testimonies, I'm not sure which ones were taken concurrently, but it appears Prozac didn't work. All the other list of medications did not work. Maybe some of them made the problem worse. Defense attorney Reddington told the judge that this was not a situation that was planned by any means. This was a situation clearly of mental illness. Some people really agree. Some people beg to differ. Some people look at Lindsay's movements as figuring out how far away she was sending her husband via Apple Maps and timing it, sending him to a restaurant, sending him to CVS, giving her the amount of time she needed to, unfortunately, take her children off the earth. But it's not like Lindsay wasn't trying to get help. She had left her job temporarily as a labor and delivery nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital. She was attending a very intense 5 days per week program to try and get help for postpartum depression. Patrick, her husband, meanwhile, he was doing his part too. He was working from home instead of working outside of the home, just being a constant presence there in their lives to make sure things would hopefully go okay. The public opinion shifted a little bit when people started hearing the details of this horrible crime, especially one of Lindsay's first questions we learned that she asked by writing it out. On January 27th, just 3 days after the tragedy, according to prosecutors, Lindsay was intubated. We've seen her in the hospital with the mask, so she couldn't speak. Lindsay wrote a question on an erasable whiteboard. One of the first questions she asked was, "Do I need an attorney?" Now, some people really went off on that because they thought that was the first question she asked. We don't know yet, in my research, what the actual first question she asked was. Did she know the state of her children at that point? What did she know? What is her mental state at this point? According to the assistant DA, that question was telling. Sprague claimed at that point Lindsay knew she'd murdered her children, but she had the mental acuity, focus, and acumen to focus on protecting her own rights. Once again, the prosecutors claim that even before January 24th, Lindsay was on it. She had enough clarity to detail her daily activities, her children's activities, her medications, with clear and precise writing. According to prosecutors, Lindsay never had indications that she was hallucinating, delusional, or had any disordered thoughts or speech patterns. However, we know Lindsay told her husband Patrick that she heard that male voice telling her, "This is your last chance to do away with you all." This is the journal entry from October 2022, where Lindsay wrote of resenting her kids. Writing about her older children, Lindsay wrote, "I think I sort of resent my other children because they prevent me from treating Cal like my first baby. And I know it's not fair to them, I know that. I was feeling depressed last evening when Cora and Dawson came home from school. I know it runs off on them, so we had a pretty rough evening. I want to feel love and connection with all of my kids." Lindsay did admit in the month before the murders, as recently as December 2022, that she was having suicidal thoughts, and she told her husband, and at least on one occasion, she told her husband Patrick that she had thoughts of harming the children. That's why Lindsay committed herself to a mental facility on January 1st, but she was discharged only 4 days later. Patrick said his wife Lindsay at first was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. In December, a psychiatrist said Lindsay didn't have postpartum depression. In the meantime, the prosecutor is claiming that Lindsay committed these cold-blooded acts with calculation, since it takes about 4 to 6 long minutes to perform a ligature strangulation like that. The ADA said that Lindsay could have changed her mind at any moment and removed those bands from the children's necks, but she didn't. She used Apple Maps to make sure she had sent her husband far away enough and long enough for her to commit those horrible acts. However, Patrick Clancy is a lot more kind and forgiving of his wife. After all, he knew her really well. He was there, a party, a witness day to day to her struggles. On a GoFundMe page that raised over $1 million the last time I checked, Patrick Clancy wrote about people trying to find forgiveness for his wife. I want to ask all of you that you find it deep within yourselves to forgive Lindsay as I have. That's what Patrick wrote. The real Lindsay was generously loving and caring towards everyone. Me, our kids, family, friends, and her patients. The very fibers of her soul are loving. All I wish for now is somehow that she can find peace. That's what Patrick wrote. But will she be able to find peace ever? Will the public ever be able to forgive her? Will they have more sympathy for her than other women who've committed similar crimes in the past? Let's talk about one we don't hear often about, Melanie Stokes. Melanie Stokes disappeared one day in Chicago, Thursday, June 7th, 2001. That's the same year that Andrea Yates would commit her crimes of drowning her 5 children. Well, Melanie Stokes suffered from severe postpartum psychosis, but her case is a little different. Melanie was a gorgeous new mom. She loved flowers, walking on the lakefront with her new months-old little baby girl in Chicago. She ended up jumping to her death from the 12th floor of a hotel. It was a big search for Melanie. She went missing, and her family and friends, of course, over that weekend were looking for Melanie. It became a big story. It was just after 6 a.m. on a Monday morning when Chicago firefighters were called to a Days Inn at 1816 North Clark Street. There was someone, some desperate soul, Melanie, it turns out, on the upper ledge of the hotel. A firefighter had reached out to give her a hand over the top of a double-hung window, but instead Melanie plunged feet first onto the sidewalk below. Carol Blocker is Melanie's mom, and she knew her daughter, a new mom, was in a desperate state because that previous Thursday, Melanie had told her mother goodbye, so her mother knew that Melanie was in a desperate state. Melanie left her Bronzeville home and stepped into a taxi and disappeared. Of course, her mother, Carol, has deep regrets. We should have committed her until everything kicked in. That's what her mother said. Her mother realizes now that it takes 4 to 6 weeks for some of this antidepressant medication to kick in. From the time that Melanie disappeared from her Bronzeville home on Thursday, and so many people were looking for her, until Sunday, no one knows where she was. But Melanie checked into that Days Inn hotel at 5 a.m., that Sunday under a fake name. A lot of that day she spent, ironically, in the hotel's lobby or in the hospitality room. Unfortunately, no one must have recognized her at that point as the missing woman that everyone was looking for, her family and friends. But Melanie did talk to a doctor from upstate New York, and she was asking the woman about carbon monoxide poisoning. Just like in other cases, that doctor said Melanie didn't seem strange or off. Melanie was telling this doctor that she had had a friend who suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning, and that's why she wanted to speak about that subject. There was nothing strange about how she was acting or talking. This is another indication that a mother can be suffering from the deep stages of postpartum psychosis, but still seem very normal, carry on a conversation with other people, and no one get the indication that anything is wrong. Melanie was a 41-year-old who grew up in Chicago, went to a private Harvard St. George school in Hyde Park, Chicago, Immaculata High School, and then even went to the famous Spelman College in Atlanta. Her mother says she thought Melanie was afraid of the corporate world. So she jumped through a few jobs. She was a waitress in Hyde Park. She worked at the front desk in a downtown Hyatt, Chicago hotel. And then she finally joined the AstraZeneca pharmaceutical company. She skyrocketed in the sales genre. So that was her position. That was a job she enjoyed until she left due to her pregnancy. She was even married to a doctor, Dr. Sam Stokes. He's a surgeon at Cook County Hospital. They were married 3.5 years and they desperately wanted children. Finally, they became pregnant. They had a little girl named Summer, but another indication of trouble happened. As soon as Summer was born, Melanie showed no interest in the baby. Her aunts had to come help. So there was that disconnection that some moms talk about. That can be a first indication of problems. People shouldn't look at the surface and say, oh, that's just a lazy mom. Oh, you're not a good mom. You're just being selfish. You want your career and you don't care about being a mom, just buck up. We can't treat moms like that. Motherhood is not something necessarily every woman just will take to like the Hallmark commercials, and it's so natural and lovely, and breastfeeding is so easy, and that's not always the case. And it's not the mother's fault if she doesn't react that way. So after Melanie's aunts came to help, Melanie reached out to her mom. After her aunts came to help, she knew something was wrong with her. She said, "Mommy, something has happened to me. I felt something snap in my brain." Melanie was hospitalized 3 times during those 3 short months that she was a mom to this baby girl. Each time was for a week to 10 days. Melanie refused to eat and drink, and she wouldn't take pills. She got really, really super thin. One of those times Melanie came home from the hospital, she went to a neighbor's house and asked him if he had a loaded gun. Almost every time she went to visit her aunts, who lived in high-rise buildings as well, she would rush over to their windows and start taking out the screens. She was in a desperate state, so her aunts stayed with her. They began staying with Melanie all day to watch her. It was that fateful Thursday morning when Melanie ate breakfast and she was smiling and she waited for her husband to leave for work. That's when she called her mom, Carol, and told her, "You've been a good mom and to take care of the baby." Now, this is what's different in this instance of psychosis to show you how things can just play out differently. Thank God Melanie didn't take her 3-month-old baby with her, but she did call her mom and say, "You've been a great mom, take care of the baby." It's for that reason that little Summer is alive today, a thriving, beautiful, gorgeous young woman. While some women focus on only harming themselves, other women focus primarily on harming the children. Other women focus on harming themselves and the children. So postpartum problems can play out in a myriad of ways. Andrea Pia Yates is one of the most famous cases we've seen of this type of postpartum crime and how the courts handled it. She was from a suburb of Houston, Texas, and she confessed to drowning all 5 of her children in the bathtub on June 20th, 2001. Very close to the time that Melanie Stokes, the Chicago mom, harmed herself. So Andrea was 37 at the time, and she experienced severe postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and schizophrenia. She too waited for her husband Rusty to go to work before she performed the heinous acts. When Rusty was gone, Andrea decided to drown the children one by one, and you just hear the horrible testimony of she apparently chased one child through the home. Some of these children, of course, are old enough to know what's happening. Depending on the order that it happens, they may witness their mom doing something. I can't imagine how confusing that would be. The one person who's supposed to love you the most in the world, seeing them harm your sibling and knowing you're next. After Andrea drowned the children, she did not do away with herself, but she did call 911. She called 911 repeatedly, and then she called Rusty and told him to come home from work. I'm not sure how much Rusty knew or the 911 operator knew initially. She was charged with 5 counts of murder, and it became a huge trial in 2002. But Andrea pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, the same type of defense that Lindsay Clancy is going for. And with Andrea Yates, it was this religious delusion that drove her to harm her kids. According to psychiatrists, Andrea believed that Satan was in her, and the only way to save her children from hell was to drown them. A psychiatrist asked Andrea, "Did you want to hurt the children?" "No," Andrea said. "No? You tried very hard not to?" the psychiatrist asked her. Andrea at that point was heavily medicated on antipsychotic drugs, and she just nodded. "What did you think would happen to the children?" Andrea was asked. "What did you think would happen?" Andrea answered, in their innocence, they'd go to heaven. "They'd go to heaven?" she was asked. "Yeah." Andrea took the lives of 7-year-old Noah, 5-year-old John, 3-year-old Paul, 2-year-old Luke, and 6-month-old Mary. I'm just remembering their biblical names after all this time. The defense claimed that Andrea didn't need to be incarcerated. She needed intensive help in a mental health facility. She was asked, "You were worried about them going to hell?" And Andrea nodded. "You thought that was a possibility?" she was asked. Andrea answered, "I just thought that since they were so young," and then she started crying. Prosecutors did agree with the defense that Andrea was mentally ill, but they were still arguing that she knew right from wrong. Andrea was asked, "What did you think would happen after you killed your children?" Andrea said, "I'd be arrested." Andrea allegedly did attempt to do away with herself at some point, but was not successful, obviously. According to the doctor, Andrea was warned not to have child number 5. Previously, Andrea described hearing a voice telling her to harm Noah. "I was washing my hands at the sink, and there was a knife there, and the voice was telling me," telling you what? "Telling me to hurt Noah." "To hurt Noah with the knife?" Andrea said, "Yeah." But prosecutors tried to impress upon the court that Andrea was a sick woman, not an evil woman. People couldn't get beyond what she did, and some people cannot get beyond what Lindsay has done. Even Andrea Yates' husband, Rusty, he believes that Lindsay Clancy should not be prosecuted. Rusty Yates even has compassion for Lindsay. It's not excusing what these moms have done, but this is a man who walked a mile in the shoes of what Patrick is walking through now. Initially, Rusty stood by Andrea. Rusty spoke to a crowd of media and said she loved those kids. This was in 2001. Later, of course, Rusty moved on and remarried. I remember back then he got such backlash. People were looking to blame him. I believe too harshly. I'm not sure how much Rusty knew. Some people claim Rusty was told Andrea should not have been left alone with the children. Back then, Rusty was painted in such a bad light as this man who just wanted to keep impregnating his wife and not helping her at all with these 5 kids and leaving her alone with them. Of course, he didn't work from home. He still left for work. I'm not sure everything he did or didn't do, but I do feel it's unfair to blame these husbands, just like Patrick, in my opinion, working from home, left for about 20 or 25 minutes to run these errands for Lindsay. I'm sure in no way, if he believed his children would be harmed in the way they were, he would have left. I don't think the husbands should be blamed. Initially in 2002, a jury found Andrea Yates guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to up to 40 years in prison, but her attorney fought that verdict and it was overturned. So in 2006, Andrea Yates was retried and then she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. So since January 2007, Andrea Yates has been in this mental health facility, the Kerrville State Hospital in Kerrville, Texas. And each year she has been declining to be released from that hospital. Part of the rules state Andrea could undergo a review every year to decide if she's competent enough all these years later to be released from that mental health facility. But Andrea, who is now either 58 or turning 58 this year, 2023, she declines that review every year. Instead, she has chosen to continue treatment, which is likely the best scenario for her. We don't know her treatment, but Andrea is, quote, happy in that facility. Her defense attorney, George Parnham, called her happy. He still talks to Andrea. He says she's where she needs to be. And he said, hypothetically, where would she go? What would she do? Indeed, what would Andrea do if she got out now? Would she remarry? Would she be around children? Would she ever snap again? That defense attorney said that Andrea grieves for her children every day, and she even watches old home videos of the kids that she did away with. She makes aprons and cards and gifts, and she even sells them anonymously. But the money goes to the Yates Children's Memorial Fund. If Lindsay does make it to trial, allegedly she's paralyzed, Lindsay is, from the belly button down or so. I'm not sure. I believe that's permanent, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps if Lindsay makes it, she can experience the same fate as Andrea. Some people think she belongs in prison for life. I don't know if that would be necessarily helpful for her condition. She's already in a prison of her own making. She did away with her freedom, her children, and now her husband maybe will go on to live his life eventually if he gets through the grief or lives with the grief daily like Rusty did. Maybe Patrick will go on to remarry and maybe even have more kids someday. I have compassion for all these moms, dads, and kids. And as a mom of two, I can only thank and praise God that I never experienced the depths of despair or depression that these women went through. They lost their whole families, taking them away in the blink of an eye. Now, back in the day, my mom, who had children in the 60s, a lot wasn't known about this. It was only just called the baby blues. She kind of warned me about something that could exist after a woman had children, but it just sounded like, oh, there's this deep blues or depression or something that comes on you, and people think it's temporary. Thankfully, I didn't experience much of that. I always felt connected to my children. You do have really low moments. I remember holding my baby son in 2001 in California. You know, you go from being this corporate person with a whole different social setting, you're busy, you're all of this, to going home. If you stay home either temporarily or for a longer period of time, it's just you and this baby, and thank God for being there with me. It was the witching hour, as they call it. Some babies experience that when it's about 5 p.m. or so and they can't take it anymore. They might start hollering and screaming. I remember just holding him in our California home and playing, combating any voices of evil or any thoughts of evil. I played Nicole C. Mullen's song, I Get on My Knees, and there I am before the love that changes me. And I cried and held him, and we made it through each day. I even walked that boy in a stroller for 2 hours every day in California. It was good for my mental health. Be out there in the sunshine. Thank God it was California, north of the Bay Area, and all these places to walk, and not a lot of stay-at-home moms around, but we got through it. I wholeheartedly believe in medication. I just wish Lindsay could have found the proper combination to help her. I wish Melanie could have. I wish Andrea could have, to help them get through these rough patches. Coming home or changing careers, becoming a full-time mom, or at least temporarily, whether you have a night nurse or a nanny or help or not, it's a big shift. Breastfeeding isn't always easy. Another thing, thank God in the first week, I was able to see a lactation specialist where they take this formula thing, and it's literally a tube, a tape, and they let the formula come down that adds onto your milk that helps facilitate more of a breastfeeding process. I'll never forget my son's eyes pop open that Friday after he was so dehydrated and just starving literally from me not producing enough milk. And these things can happen, and they can send some women down in the depths because everything's supposed to be natural. You're supposed to be perfect. You're supposed to take to it like a fish to water. You're supposed to just spurt out milk like a cow's udders, and it doesn't always happen that way. By the time I had my second child, my daughter, and my kids are only 18 months apart, it's almost like having twins. Some days when they're young, really especially, are so rough. I literally had to strap both of them in our SUV and just drive around town. A change of scenery. Cabin fever is a real thing. If you spend too much time indoors in recycled air, it literally can affect your brain. Getting outside can help. You know, sometimes the weather isn't always conducive. Sometimes it's dark. Sometimes, you don't want to be running around. Not every mom can afford to have a stroller, a double stroller, or live near a park, or go jog and all that. Thankfully, I was able to strap them in the SUV. I literally would put on these Joyce Meyer tapes and listen to her preach the word of God as I just drove around, and they calmed down. We all calmed down. I felt like I needed toothpicks holding open my eyes, but thank God I stayed awake. And you battle those voices or thoughts of evil. I never heard an audible voice of evil like these women did. Thank the Lord. But thoughts can come to all of us. Maybe driving or somewhere, a thought might come, wouldn't it just be easier to just leave it all behind? Everything will be fine without me. Or just even driving, a thought would come, run into that brick wall. Now, I've learned enough, thankfully, about the voice of God, the voice of truth, to know these are not our thoughts. These thoughts, these voices coming to these moms, scientifically, you can look at it one way as, of course, psychosis, a mental problem. You can also add to that, not in a religiously fervorous, wacky kind of way, but just to know there is an enemy, and he will introduce thoughts into your brain that's not you. Of course, you don't want to run into a brick wall. You don't want to take the lives of your children. You know that's not you. Any mom who fought through miscarriages, periods of infertility or did IVF or whatever, or either got pregnant easily and truly desired these babies, you know it's not you if there's a voice telling you to harm them. Reach out for help like these moms did. Unfortunately, it's too late for these moms to make a difference, but it's not too late for any other mom or any other dad who is watching his partner go through this. I knew it wasn't the voice of God. I wish Andrea wouldn't have listened to that voice of religious fanaticism. Of course, she didn't have to drown her kids because that was the way to get them to heaven. No, Jesus is the way to heaven. The children are there now, but she didn't have to do that. She didn't have to facilitate them going there. I don't know why Lindsay performed what she did. I wish she hadn't have listened to that evil male voice telling her, now's your last chance. Last chance for what? I wish she had the wherewithal, the fortitude, the mental facilities, the medications, the clarity, the focus, the lucidity to speak back to that voice and say, not today, Satan, okay? I plead the blood of Jesus over my mind, my family, my home, and you are not going to get me. And I just wish she could have gotten the treatment she needed to have that converted, clarified mind. Those thoughts or voices can come. They can be combated with medication, with knowledge, equipped with knowledge, but you fight back because you know they're not coming from you. Some of the blessings of Melanie Stokes' case is Chicago learned to treat postpartum conditions a little bit differently. There's a lot of information out there if you Google it about all the changes that happened in the wake of Melanie's case. Hopefully with Lindsay's case, I hope that awareness and compassion proliferates. I hope people recognize the signs a lot sooner. Stop blaming the moms. Don't just look at it as a burn in hell, death penalty, fry type reaction. But hold compassion for the victims, but also hold compassion for these women going through something that we may have never experienced, thank God, at that level, but we can attempt to understand to help prevent the next Andrea Yates, the next Melanie Stokes, and the next Lindsay Clancy from ever happening. To close, it's something very appropriate. John 10:1-5, Jesus is the good shepherd. Jesus said, truly, truly, I tell you, whoever does not enter the sheepfold by the gate but climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber. That's what these thoughts or evil voices are. But the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him. Jesus is the gate. And the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will flee from him because they do not recognize his voice. That's my goal. When you hear a weird voice, an evil voice telling you to harm your children or yourself, just know it's not from God. It is okay to call hotlines, tell someone. Don't stay silent because you're afraid that someone will take your children away. Instead, reach out to trusted people and mental health professionals. Tell them what you're going through. It's much better to get and seek help and keep on trying for that proper medication combination. Don't be afraid to tell your partner, tell your husband, tell whomever, your sister, like some of these women attempted to. Unfortunately, in their case, it didn't work, but other cases, it can really work. It can be prevented. Don't down yourself for going through something you didn't expect. If it's at the level where you're seriously thinking of scenarios to harm your children, or hearing voices, or battling these thoughts, and it's too overwhelming, reach out. It will make the difference. And I pray this video and these scenarios can help you and save children and save families till you get over that hump. It's no shame in having other people, safe people, watch your children while you take care of your own mental health. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.